Heart is pounding in his chest, reaches suddenly for his gun. Should be sailing in the west, flower, flower that could be his fun. Tree of families on his head, weary red, split open eyes. I'm on the corner thinking about my bed. It's just in store and signifies. Looks just like the sun. This week we're talking about Broken Social Scene's sophomore album, You Forgot It in People.
Welcome to the Essential Albums podcast, where three guys from 85 have a conversation about some of the biggest albums ever and forgotten favorites from yesteryear. We'll dig into an album's place in culture, discuss its merits, and decide if a record holds up and is worth your time. Of course, we get into a lot more than that, so join longtime friends Ryan, Denise, and Gordon as we dive into our favorite albums and relive some of the classics. All right, so let's get started. I guess this week we're doing a little bit of a change up. We're doing something from the 2000s, something a little newer. It's not the hard rock we've been doing over the last few weeks. Who picked this album? Was it you, Anise?
Must have been.
I think it's one of the ones where if someone mentioned it, we were all like, yeah,
let's do it.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So I guess why did we pick it? If whoever picked it, whoever wants to take the blame.
Well, we all have it, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Well, all I have left is this part.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. For me, they're one of my favorite bands, so I just wanted to talk about them. And if anyone who's listening hasn't heard them, they should listen to them because they're good. But
yeah, definitely. Would you? I don't know if you call them indie darlings, because when I first saw them, I'm not sure how big. Maybe I'm jumping ahead. We can get into that. So why don't I kick things off by what is your relationship to the band, Denise?
My relationship with them is pretty deep. Like, they pretty much instantly became a favorite once I heard them. It was a rare, because normally with me in music, it's as you guys know, it's usually me introducing other people to new music, being like, oh, check out this band, because I try to stay on top of things.
That's how I heard of Broken Social Scene.
Yeah. So this was back in the day, high school days. So around the time this album must have come out. But we would be on the message board for a local band called Fervid Whisper. And it was sort of like the hotbed message board to be on for like our small group of bands, local bands, I guess, at the time. And someone I was not even friends with really, but we just kind of knew we had similar taste in music. He put a post just saying, Anise, check out Broken Social Scene, You Forgot It in People. It was a guy named Mike Cook, I don't know his name exactly. Barely knew the guy, but he recommended me the album. So I was like, okay. Downloaded it that night, like literally downloaded it at that moment, listened to it, thought it was the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Went out the next day, out school on my lunch, to the local record store downtown and picked this bad boy up.
Yeah.
So, but ever since then, they've been a favorite. This album has been countlessly played millions of times, seen them live, I don't even know at this point, 12, 13, 14 times or something. Just so many times. So yeah, that's my relationship. It's more of an obsession. Well, it was more of an obsession in my college days, but still pretty big into them. But yeah.
Nice. How about you, Ryan?
Yeah, it's like Broken Social Scene. It was to me like the flagship indie rock band. I know we're from Canada, so this perspective may be a little bit slanted, but for me, like, it opened up all the connection to all those other arts and crafts artists. So suddenly I was listening to all this other stuff, and yeah, much like Anise, as soon as I heard this, I was hooked immediately. And it wasn't one of those one of those situations where you scan for like a single or you scan for a certain thing you might like. I just listened to it straight through and I couldn't turn it off, even though there's a lot of like spots where there's no vocals. Like, I'm pretty sure you lent me your Discman. Actually, I know you did, because you used to do this. Like, I think you had like gym or something, and I had music. So we had music, and I was just doing theory work like the whole class. So I had this on. I just couldn't turn it off. Like, I was blown away the whole class. And like, as soon as I met up with you at lunch, I was like, this is amazing. This is a masterpiece.
It also kind of touching on what you were saying, it marked the first time that I was listening to a band that no one else knew, it felt like. Because up until that point, it was sort of the popular stuff, like, Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, like all the big bands, even when it got to the new metal or the heavier stuff like Tool and Nine Inch Nails. And even like when I was trying to expand my horizons, it was more so jumping back in time and listening to older bands from the 70s, 80s, 60s and stuff. But this was the first time where it was like an indie rock, small band, Canadian band that it was like, whoa, they were on my radar. And all of a sudden it seemed like around that same time, it was like this whole new world opened up.
It was like a phase shift, I felt, for like my relationship to rock music. Like my band started writing music differently. You know, it was at the end of high school, so it's like coming. I think it was pretty much close to the end of high school. Well, by the time it influenced our writing and stuff, like suddenly we were listening to indie rock. Indie rock was the next thing. Before that, it was like new metal. not exactly, but you know, you get what I'm saying.
And I think the fact that they were Canadian made it sort of like extra special because there was definitely an era of going to Toronto to a local, not a local show, but just going to any concert in Toronto, like Lee's Palace, the Cool House, wherever you were, the Horseshoe Tavern. You would always see a member of Broken Souls. Well, there's so many of them, but you'd always see a member out at a show. It was kind of a cool experience. Like I had multiple conversations with Kevin Drew at REM concerts, at Radiohead concerts. Like it's
he
cool.
was at the My Bloody Valentine concert.
Kevin he was at My Bloody Valentine concert. So it's kind of a cool thing. How about you, Gordon? When did you first hear this album and this band? What's your relationship?
Okay, so I kind of have a funny story that adds on to what you guys were doing. So I guess this would have been high school. I think it would have been, I'm not sure if it was like our final year of grade 12 or if it was our victory lap. I guess it was our victory lap. And we were shooting a high school short film in high school for our class. And it was me, Ryan, and a bunch of, I guess, other people that we I guess we're all friends with that.
What film? What are you talking about?
Safe Life. That
was, okay, this one. Okay.
Yeah, so we were out shooting one night, and I guess you picked me up from work. You were the only one that had your G license or your G2 or whatever, so you were able to drive. We had limited seats. Yeah, you had limited seats in your car. So I was like, all right, I'll get in the trunk because like there's nowhere for me to sit. I'm not gonna sit on people. So I got in the trunk, and it was like more bass, less treble, but you could hear it perfectly. And I got out of the trunk and I was like, what were you just playing? That sounds really good. And then
totally forgot about that.
You were like, Anise showed me this band. It's called Broken Social Scene. So I was like, I got to check that out. So then I ended up going to Encore Records, the same record store. I don't know if it was the next day, but it was later on. And I bought that album. And that's how I got it. That's why I got this version. And I don't have like the reissue version that is more commonly known. But that was my introduction to Broken Social Scene in that weird way.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that's amazing. You ended up in the trunk.
In the trunk, curled up in the ball in the trunk. That's how I heard Broken Social.
Funny for all of us how like it was sort of different than everything we were already listening to, but we were all instantly drawn to it immediately.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like it took let me hear a couple of songs or like this song's okay. We were all sort of like drawn in. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just how the album is built and it slowly creeps in and stuff, but it's definitely like catches you right away and keeps your attention. And like you said, Ryan, very minimal lyrics. Like the amount of like singing on this album is few and far between. And I didn't even realize it. The first few, someone else mentioned it to me, and I was like, "Oh, is it instrumental? Like the music is so busy and so interesting that you don't even notice that the first two tracks have barely any vocals, and it doesn't really happen until you know what I mean. Like it's just so entrancing."
Yeah, by the time the vocals show up on the album, you're like, oh yeah, singing. Whoa, okay, that's cool. Like, but it's not like you were lacking.
No. And it was also interesting because like at the time, don't want to get too ahead of myself, but like just the only other, because I guess they fall under the post rock, especially coming out of that first album. And the only ones I really knew at the time were like Mogwai and a couple others, but mainly Mogwai. And they would usually build up to these big rock moments on their albums, whereas it would be this atmospheric music that would build into a pop song.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like such a stark contrast from what we were used to, but it was very nice.
Yes, and one last thing about my relationship to the band, because this was significant for me. Like I was about to go into jazz school, just as about a year after I got this album, and there's a lot of elements on here. A lot of jazz elements, a lot of Latin elements that, kind of primed me, and it gave me this attitude that like I can absorb the jazz stuff and mix it in with my own like sort of indie rock tendencies. You know, I had that example of them like, okay, yeah, Latin stuff is really cool, and that sort of like primed me for all the stuff I was about to learn. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we were primed at the right time. It was just more like a palate cleanser, because you got to think like this album came out end of 2002. We probably picked up 2003, so that's going through, like, for me personally, I was going through like the hip hop stuff. I was going through some stuff, but I was going through that was like the new metal era, and then it was more into the hip hop, and then that's when everything kind of like my interest and my taste started to shift going into college more into like this indie rock kind of stuff, and started loosening up. Not every song I listened to had to be hard or like a heavy song anymore. It was like, no, I'm really digging this. And it made like other bands, like listening to like Radiohead, even easier, because you're like, this just sounds great. Like, this is what I want to listen to going forward.
Yeah, it's a good thing you heard it in the trunk first, you know, so it was a little bit harder and heavier the first listen.
That's true. I needed that step.
That's a thing to it too, because they're like an indie pop, indie rock band, but their guitars and stuff, they have enough of that like 90s alternative edge to it, because a lot of their band members were part of the 90s music scene as well, so that bleeds into their music a lot. So yeah. So that there's that influence already in it, so like we're probably subconsciously gravitating towards it, and you know, hearing that parts of music that we recognize from our own history of listening to rock music.
Yeah, part of like indie rock seems to be just like, I don't know, like just absorbing this the collaborative attitude, you know, where everybody's just working together. So that really adds to this album too, and yeah, I was jealous. I wanted to be in that band.
Yeah, and a lot of like indie rock is like such a broad term because it means so many things. But to me, it's always meant like, because you got so much different stuff. Like a band like Broken Social Scene will fall under indie rock, but then so would like, you know, the Strokes or something. One's like kind of a garage rock, one is kind of post pop, I guess.
Yeah.
But like the only thing that really ties them together, I think that indie rock, if I had to define this genre, even though I hate genres, it's almost like a deconstruction of the past. They take bits and pieces from different influences and they try to present it in a different way or in a familiar way, but with their own spin, like kind of like what the Strokes were doing or the White Stripes. You know, they were kind of really playing off the past but doing something different, whereas this was sort of deconstructing everything and sort of mixing it all, but
yeah,
but you know, still with that bedroom rock sound that kind of works.
But I noticed that a lot of these indie rock bands just referred to their music as pop music, and whereas before then, you know, oh, it's not pop music, it's rock music, like this different attitude. It's almost so that way it would open up all different types of music, because like, what's pop music? That's pretty much everything outside of classical.
Yeah, yep. So I guess that with that we can dive more into the album and get some more song specific questions. But before we do, I just want to ask, how often is this album in your rotation, Ryan?
This one comes up often, pretty often. There's just a lot. It still has a lot of elements that, I mean, it's a masterpiece in my opinion. So I go back to this one more often than a lot of stuff. So how often? I don't know. What does that mean? Maybe every year.
Yeah. How about you, Anis?
For me, it's the same. I listen to it all the time. Like even when we were preparing for this week, it was already downloaded and saved on my Spotify. Like up until that, the CD was always in my car, so it's kind of regularly in there. But the thing with them is, for some of their later stuff, it's more songs, whereas this is like the album. It's almost like this whole album has to be taken in. It isn't really like a track by track thing. Mm-hmm. Even like throwing on some of their big singles off this, like Almost Crimes or Cause Equals Time, it like they're good singles, but to me it's still just the album. It's the whole package, because those songs don't really represent what the album is going to take you on, the journey.
Yeah. To really just one song specific mention, like Cause Equals Time, by the time you get to that track, it's like, holy crap. So you've been on this adventure the whole time, and then you get to this amazing song. You're like, oh my God, there's more. Whereas, you know, as a standalone song, it's good. It is a good song. It's a really rocking song, but that element is missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you, Gordon? How often do you listen to this? You forgot it.
I would say I throw it on at least a couple times a year. I'll throw on the singles, or I find like sometimes if I do Broken Social Scene, with Spotify now, I'll just throw on like the most popular songs. A lot of them are from this album anyway. So I'll attack it like that. But more often than not, I think you're right. I think it's one of those things where you got to listen to it as an album as a whole. And that's more often how I'm listening to it. So when I throw it on, I'm usually like, I want to listen to that. So I'll listen to it all the way through. So I would say at least once or twice a year, I'm listening to this album.
And even to go to that, like it's consumed the best as an album. Even on YouTube, they have late 90s bedroom rock for missionaries and Shampoo Suicide as one video. Like,
okay, cool.
Video. So because they kind of bleed in together, so they just put it as one video.
Right.
Kind of goes to show you that's how the album is sort of built to be one project, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess we can that can open us up to, it's a good segue into some song specific questions. So when I looked, I saw that this album technically only has 2 singles from it, Stars and Suns, and it's a combination single, I guess, with Casey Accidental, and then Cause Equals Time. Although Almost Crimes does have a music video. I think it was just released much later after the album started to pick up steam. So I have seen that music video on Much Music. So I guess we can ask, in terms of the song questions, what do you think is the biggest song from this album if you had to pick one?
Like going into this week, I would have said Almost Crime, because that was the song that they sang on every late night show. It's the one that gets the big boom live. It had Leslie Feist on it, who became huge immediately after this album was released.
Yeah.
It had the juice at the time, but then seeing them live, like all the times I see them live, the biggest pop is Anthem for a 17-year-old Girl.
No way. Okay,
yeah,
so
that's the biggest pop, like, and it's not even like close. It might be part of it. Part of it might be because usually in Toronto, Emily Haynes comes out as well to sing it. Like, she's usually there. I don't know what it's like when they're on tour, but yeah, no, that one I find just always has the biggest pop. And then looking this week, it's like, oh, it's also the most streamed. So it kind of lines up with their live show.
Yeah, that makes total sense, because I remember, like, when you're listening to the album, you know that song is special. Like, amongst they're all great, like, but there's something about that song, it just like grips you right away, and you're held in this weird zone for so long. I'm not surprised that it is like their most popular song. Although I would have thought it was at the time, like Cause Equals Time, I thought was like the big thing. But I mean, that's just coming off of my impression of it. Yeah. Maybe that's because we covered the song. But
yeah, but like, and also Almost Crimes, I would think that the most like someone who probably doesn't even know Broken Social Scene well, I feel like they would recognize that song more than they'd recognize Anthem for a 17-year-old Girl.
Yeah.
Because even like Shoreline, because that was like sort of the sequel to it, and that had a lot of play as well. That's one of their most streamed songs as well. So I don't know. It's weird. Like it doesn't. It's such a strange album that it's weird to pick a biggest song.
I know. I was gonna say Almost Crimes is like more representative of like the sound, but like no, man, this album, not exactly. Like that's one aspect of the band. They do that rock out, loud drums kind of thing occasionally, but not all the time.
Well, it was something done more like in the later on, but yeah, definitely. When this album came out, it was something very unique for them, at least.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Anise. Going into it, I thought it was Almost Crimes, and then I thought about it. I saw on Spotify it's Anthems is the number one. But I think that also the other thing is I think it got a pretty good push with Scott Pilgrim on that movie, because I'm pretty sure it's in that movie and it's included on that soundtrack. So okay. I think, and then of course the Emily Haynes connection when she comes out, I'm sure that's also adds to it too.
But you're right, for the American audience. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say of all the Broken Social Scene family tree, Metric is probably one of the bigger of the bands, along with like Feist.
The crazy thing is though, like when that song came out and this album came out, it's before the debut of Metric, right? So Emily Haynes was just like, who's that? Oh, have you ever heard of that indie band Metric? It's like, probably not. So it's funny how she's kind of overcame them in terms of like the success, but her roots are here.
Yeah, I remember I had this around the same time I bought this, I got this Paper Bag Records like demo CD thing. I might have got it at Hillside, but on it there was a lot of the the bands, like a lot of the Broken Social Scene bands. So I learned a lot about not just through Broken Social Scene, but also from that festival and that compilation CD. I remember it had like Stars on it, and I think it might even have Metric, even though they don't fall under that umbrella. But had a lot of Do Make Say Think and that kind of stuff. Which is really cool.
Yeah, so I guess we can also just quickly mention that like this album's the first album to be released under Arts and Crafts. I didn't realize that until we got going. I've always like associated Arts and Crafts with this, but I didn't know that this is like their flagship release. So even on the code, I think it says like AC001 as like the serial number. So
yeah,
that shows you that it's like this is where it all starts for Arts and Crafts, who would go on to distribute like many other great bands. And
it just makes me think of whenever you see them live, Kevin Drew always goes on these like weird little rants about love and togetherness and hope and all this stuff. But I remember at the 10-year anniversary of this, when they did the field trip, he pretty much went on this whole rant about like the whole label and everything exists because of this album. And it's very much true. Like this album was such like a big deal amongst critics and in the indie scene that it pretty much made that label survive.
Yeah. Yeah,
made it a label, made it a real thing.
That's why I view them probably as like the biggest indie, like the indie god band of indie rock. But I know they're not. But I put them up on this pedestal, and maybe that's also because there's so many people involved. It's like a super group kind of. Like it's interesting that Arcade Fire eventually blew up as like the Canadian indie band, you know, to really make it. But you know, this is still
it's different.
It's way above there, in my opinion. It's just it's something special. It's something else. So I'm surprised it didn't pick up more. But I guess I don't know. There was no real singles to push it, like that were, you know, strict pop songs. There's always some weirdness, so that's hard for people.
I always say the kind of the indie rock generation got screwed over because they came out in a time before streaming was a thing.
Yeah.
And so they have probably lost out on a lot of streams and exposure through these systems because a lot of their music was being downloaded off of music sharing programs and, you know, FTP sites and torrents, and it was different. I remember going on blogs where they would have whatever new albums were out, they'd have a download link and you could just download it. And that's how a lot of this music was passed around. So yeah, you might look at Broken Social Scene on these and be like, oh, I'm surprised this album didn't pop as much. But I'm sure if you had the same streams from back when it was released, you would have had that initial pop from when it got all the good reviews. People would have been like, who is this band? Even if they would have listened to it once, it would have had all those plays.
Yeah.
These different people. So
maybe, but how's it performing on streaming now? Well, I mean, maybe it's too late.
They don't even have a
pop.
They don't even have a million monthly stream listeners. I think it's 746,000 monthly listeners. So it's not bad, but it's probably the lowest of any of the bands we've talked about so far. Yes. Maybe Death from Above might have been a bit smaller, maybe around the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I thought this week, like, being the route that I have with all this, like knowing this band kind of since their first big release, I've always just assumed that they were a big band or bigger than they are. And then this week it's like, no, they're actually really small. This is could be the smallest band that we're talking about in terms of monthly streams.
If they had that exposure from Spotify when they first came out, they might have popped. But at the same time, people were still buying CDs back then. So now nobody's buying CDs, and Spotify pays pennies. So, you know, it's whatever.
Yeah, for sure. So sorry, Ryan, did you say what did you say was the biggest song, or the song that you thought?
I thought it was at the time. I thought it was Cause Equals Time, but I think maybe just a lot of our friends are making a bigger deal out of that song, or it would be one of the ones that would get put on if there was just one song to put on.
I think we're all like any answers right out of like the big songs from this, because the album was just such like a solid performer, and I'm sure everyone who listened to it had their songs that they took from it. And I know, because like for us, this album was such a big deal in our friends group. That's probably why it seemed like such a big deal. But I'm sure maybe another group of friends somewhere else in another part of Ontario, they're like, I don't believe they're not talking about Lover's Spit yet, or I don't believe they're not talking about whatever yet. But
yeah, get the hits. I know. Yeah, now I'm I'm like, is Lover Spit like overplayed? It's like, for who? Who's it overplayed to?
Well, because wasn't Lover Spit the theme song to Queer as Folk?
I think so. I think it's been in a bunch of movies. Like,
Yeah, I swear I've heard it in different places.
So I guess this can move us on to, okay, do you guys think there's an overplayed song? Should I even ask the question? Is there an overplayed song on this album?
No.
Yeah, for my answer. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I will say at the time they were just playing Almost Crimes everywhere that they were playing it. They probably could have played something else. Maybe they did play Stars and Suns on Conan or something, but it seemed like even when they went on to Fallon for their 10-year anniversary, they played Almost Crimes.
Right. Yeah. For me, I put NA for this answer, but I did put 7/4 Shoreline because I'm like, I just remember hearing that song so much. But it was one of those things where it's like so indie when you hear it on the radio, you're like, I'm hearing it a lot, and I know I got to savor this moment or these few months because it's going to go away, and I'm not going to hear this very much. So I can't get that mad at it. Play it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, none of these songs really made it to the radio, like on a regular rotation.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it seems like now if they release a song, it's gonna. It seems like they get more play now because I remember like Fire Eyed Boy and all that stuff were getting played more regularly when later releases came out.
Yeah.
But they're still very small in comparison.
Yeah, for sure. Ryan, what's your favorite track from this album?
Looks Just Like the Sun. That's why I'm glad you started off with that. That just like the whole vibe, the 16th note and the Latin vibe, and that opened up also, like, I really got into Apostle of Hustle for a while. I don't know if you guys were into that, but it's the singer's side project, or main project. But yeah, who's also a great guitar player. He's the guy who sang Fire Eyed Boy, for if anybody knows. Yeah, so I really got into that, and it's just so jammy. It's just like, he's given instructions. It's probably like a live thing, live off the floor. I hope they didn't fake it. They might have faked it. I don't know.
It very much feels like it's just two people jamming out the song, which like when you read about how this was all recorded, it very much could have been.
Yeah, and there really only was that like one cue. You have to cue the coda at the end where the chords change, and then it kind of does that whole outro thing. But actually, about that song, I had like a solo performance sort of, it was a performance class. I had to put bands together in college, and I got like a female jazz singer to sing this song, and I had this like a horn section. It was amazing. It was like probably the best version of the song. I only heard it once. Well, plus rehearsal. But
did you record it?
No.
You can't find it on YouTube or anything?
No, man. That was just the school. Like, Plus, I had a flip phone at the time, so it would have been shit.
One thing I was actually wondering, because you know how they have all the counting and stuff, and like, was that real? Was that fake? Was that added? Was they really doing it like off the floor? Or another thing I was thinking was, did they not know that it was going to be kept in? Because a lot of the stuff was just, when you read about the recording of this album and the following album, a lot of the stuff was just people coming in and recording tracks, and then the producer, David Neufeld, pretty much made the songs in the mix.
Yeah.
Especially, you can hear it much more on the next album, but
a
lot busier.
Maybe, yeah. I feel like that's more like guitar-y, but like here we have like a mix of so much stuff, and when there is like a wall of sound thing going on, you might have like some Latin percussion in the background, and then like these weird guitars and like some violin. Like there's so much different stuff. It sounds like they were just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what's stuck, and then deleting other tracks. And
yeah, I was also going to, for my favorite song, I was also going to say Looks Just Like the Sun, just because I love that song so much. But I'll say something different. I'm going to shout out Shampoo Suicide. Love that song too.
It's good.
Nice. Yeah, it's a really good song.
I like how it starts off with that bass line. It kind of has the same sort of vibe as Looks Just Like the Sun almost a bit. But then by the end, it's like a post-rock song. It's like the most going on it.
Like starts building up.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, for the longest time for that song, I thought it was just like samples and stuff. I thought like the audio or the lyrics or whatever, like it was just kind of loops or something like that. Like you weren't meant to understand. It was more like gibberish. But then I looked it up this week, and it's like, no, those are the lyrics. It's just the mix is much lower, so it's harder to hear. Like it's really hard to hear the lyrics. Like I'm like, I didn't even know there was lyrics to this. So I thought that song. It's a good song though. Like they played the song. I remember in the movie like Half Nelson, they kind of play it in a pivotal scene at the end, and it just makes the scene work. So it's a good song.
Yeah, where he buys the drugs off the kid.
Yeah, he gives her the money.
'cause that movie Half Nelson, the Canadian movie with Ryan Gosling, and the soundtrack is this album.
Yeah, well, yeah, Broken Social Scene is credited as doing the soundtrack.
Well, it's pretty much this album, like all cut up and stamped and
right.
stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, if you like the movie Half Nelson and what you liked what you heard in there in terms of music, then definitely check out this album because it's all in the same ballpark. Like, it's
but going back to the mix and more on David Neufeld, just seeing them live, even Kevin Drew would pull him out to make the point of saying, this guy made the album. Like, pretty much we all just, like, I know he's probably blowing it out of proportion. Like, when you look at the songwriting, it's all Kevin Drew and Brendan Canning on this album are credited for all of them. But it's just, it's cool for them to, like, point out someone else being like, hey, this guy, like, why the reasons why everyone likes this music, like the atmosphere that was created by this man in the mixing.
Yeah.
And it must have been hell, like, having all these people, especially, like, it's, I think, more so of the self-titled album, but there's probably so many tracks he was weeding through, and like even in this you'll hear like little lead parts come in and out. It's like, was that part of a bigger thing that was just this was the only part used? It's almost like I want to hear the unedited cuts of all the trim, I want all of it.
Yeah, like, was the saxophone guy in Almost Crimes just like standing for most of the song? Like where does this stuff come from?
They bring him in specifically because they wanted that there, or
I kind of got the sense that they just were experimenting a lot and deleting, like carving it out, like sculpting it from a bunch of tracks. Like, okay, let's just get some stuff on, and then, okay, it might be good if we just take that out and maybe this come in later. Who knows? I don't know.
What's your favorite track, Gordon?
Oh, sorry. Just before I answer that, do you guys think this is like an album that came together through jamming, or it's just like somebody in a room just kind of messing, or two people in a room maybe messing around? They have a loose concept and then they make the song, or was it more like they wrote songs and then they just kind of evolved? I
think the way it happened is that the songs existed in its like skeleton form, and then different members came in. And if I remember correctly, because I couldn't find it this week, but I used to have like This Book is Broken, like the book about Broken Social, but I couldn't find it. But I believe in there it said it that different members would come in and just record tracks, and sometimes they would only get certain parts that they would hear when they were adding their tracks. Other times they would add parts. So it was all. So what I would guess is if you have a guitar player in, you just keep the rhythm track in, so you want to hear his leads over top of it, and then combine it with the other guy's leads and try to create something. Well, that's how I always imagined it in my head what he did, but I could be wrong.
That's really interesting. If he didn't do it, somebody should. I think that's a great way to record the album. Just withhold some stuff, so there's whoever you're recording and whatever parts they're writing, they may fill their part out a little bit more or adapt their part a little bit more because of the focus of what they're hearing. And then you as the producer can go like, okay, how much of that can I use in this context? You're essentially playing God.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I guess my favorite song, I put Casey Accidental. I'll give a shout out to Almost Crimes because that was it for a long time. But then seeing Casey Accidental live totally changed. Like, that became my favorite song after seeing that. It's such a great song to see him do it live. I think they usually play it like near the beginning of their set list, and it works like it does on the album, where it's like once it gets started, it's like it's the drums are crazy, but it's just like it's all these stop and starts, and then once it gets going, you're like, I'm on board. Like by the end of track 2, if you'll probably be on your way with this album if you get to the end of track 2.
So do you know where the name Casey Accidental comes from?
It's like the band, right? That he was in before.
It was like the previous band that Kevin Drew and Charlie Spear in. I think I have maybe even both of their albums, but they released 2 albums, and it's pretty much like the predecessor to this, like to Broken Social Scene, not to this, but
right.
Yeah, that song is like when they introduce the vocals is awesome because it's like such a rock out, and then it just breaks, and then we have vocals, and okay, cool. It's just such an added bonus. The whole album like continues to crescendo. Yeah.
I like how it's and on the back it's broken up like side 2. Pretty much side 2 starts with Cause Equals Time, and it kind of flows because like Anthem finishes nicely, and then Cause Equals Time kicks it all back up. So
totally. I almost wish I it was a double disc, so I would have got that feeling.
Buy it on
Social
vinyl.
CD.
Buy it on vinyl. Flip the
Yeah.
rip.
Yeah, for the record player in my car.
Yeah. Well, weird thing about the double disc thing. I learned a whole bunch about Broken Social Scene or their albums this week. I didn't know that Beehives was like a collection of B-sides up from this album. I thought it was just more like an EP of stuff that they had before, like earlier, but it was during this recording session that album kind of was created.
Yep.
That was cool.
And I believe there's also some like performances from like radio shows in there too, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of remixes or something.
Yeah.
Like just mixed differently, not
Actually,
remixed.
Because there's a version of Lover Spit sung by Feist on it, right?
That's right. Yeah, I listened to that this week.
That's a great version of it.
Oh, sweet.
It is good. It's a little bit slower, but it's great. It's a different. I think they call it like a reprise or something like that. But yeah, it's a little bit longer too. I think it's over 7 minutes. But if you like the original, then you'll probably like this. It's a decent sequel. Like you can tell they're siblings for sure.
Yeah.
Is there
I remember back when that came out, I almost favored that one over the one on the album. But I think it was just like a new thing, a new toy, right? So
yeah, you don't really hear it very often unless you put on that album, I think.
Is there a song from Beehives like called New Country or something, or called Old Country or something? There's some song, maybe it's just a demo of a live thing that I want to rediscover, something I got off the internet. But anyway, if anybody knows, post it in the comments.
What's the name of that song, right?
It was called New Country or Old Country or something like that. I don't know.
It's not on there.
This is just like popping into my memory, out of my memory here. So who knows?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure Kyle gave me the song.
I don't know. Maybe it's one of Kyle's songs.
No, it was live Broken Social Scene.
Anise, what do you think is an underrated track on this album?
Underrated track. I guess my pick for song, I guess, is a bit underrated. Well, I'll go with Looks Just Like the Sun, but I know like me and Ryan, we've talked about this before in the past that we both loved it. So I knew we both loved it, but I don't know how much it's liked in the world. I know when they played it, from all the times I've seen them live, I think they've only played it once or twice. So it's not something they regularly play. Mm-hmm. So I'll go with Looks Just Like the Sun.
Yeah. I'm going to cop out for my answer here and say, well, I'll let Gordon go first.
You want me to go first? I had Shampoo Suicide for mine.
Definitely.
So yeah, I think it's a great track. It's kind of, I always thought of it as like two parts. Like I always, for the first few times I listened to this album, I always thought like the 90s, whatever the name of that song is, the late 90s bedroom rock for the Missionaries.
Oh yeah.
And like Shampoo Suicide, I thought that was like a part 1, part 2 kind of thing, and they just split it up. But they're separate songs, but they definitely go well together. I gave that the underrated.
Yeah, I was gonna say the whole thing is massively underrated. Like what did you say? 700,000 listeners? Like, come on, this thing should have a revival. I don't know if it could have a revival.
Well, they've toured it on the 10-year anniversary. I'm sure they'll do the same next year for the 20.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe the indie rock thing has changed. It's gone now. It's moved on. But
I wouldn't say it's gone and moved on. I would say it's just more vast.
Yeah.
And this album was part of building that. So.
But in my mind, to be the flagship indie band in my mind, to only have such a pitiful listeners, I mean, yeah, it's not right. It's not right.
It's definitely an injustice, but yeah. So, I mean, is there a song that you skip? Should this question even be asked? I think you guys have probably already answered it.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you skip anything?
No.
Yeah, no, I mean, I say no as well. I think early on when I did the first few times I listened to this album, like it was back when I was more likely to skip tracks. So I think you guys are going to think this is crazy, but I used to skip, what is it? Stars and Suns, just to get to I used to skip Looks Just Like the Sun and Pacific Theme just to get to Anthems of a 17-year-old Girl, because that was back when I was first kind of getting into this music. But yeah, now I don't skip it at all. I'm all the way through, so I'll put no, but that's what I used to do back in like 2004.
Yeah, that is like a little cluster of like Latin vibes in there, so maybe you just weren't feeling the Latin vibes. Too much Enrique.
So you must hate Apostle. You must hate Apostle of Hustle then.
Well, the thing is, I remember I listened to their first album, or that one big album that I remember. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I did listen to that one. I would say like 50% of that album. It was pretty mellow for me.
Folklore Hill?
No, that's the second one.
I think it had like a yellow cover. I might be confused.
Or is it? Yeah, Folklore Feel, and
The
the
first
other
one.
one's National.
Yeah, something like that. But the funny thing about Apostle of Hustle, just for a side note, I saw Apostle of Hustle live 3 times, and each time was completely different. First time I saw them live was at Hillside Festival. I believe Ryan was there. And they had the full horn section because all of Broken Social Scene was there. So they literally had
Perfect
a
timing.
full horn section. And those songs, because at the time only Folkloric Feel was out, and those songs from that album sounded amazing with the horn section. Probably the best I've ever heard it. There was like a period of time where I couldn't listen to the album just because the album paled in comparison to that performance.
Oh yeah.
Second time I saw them, they were opening for the Fiery Furnace, and when I say they, I should just say he, because it was just Andrew Whiteman with a looper, and was just making loops and playing songs like that.
From
So I was
horn
like,
section to loop pedal. Holy
Yeah,
crap.
yeah. And then the third time I saw them was just the band. Like I think they were opening for the Stars. It was in Waterloo at the Starlight, I believe. I could be wrong. And it was just like the band. So I'm like, wow, every time it's like a whole different experience.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I just looked it up. That the album I was talking about was Folkloric Feel. It came out in 2004.
Yeah,
That's the one.
love that album.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It is pretty mellow. A lot of the stuff is indie rock, like kind of dabbles in mellower stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, for that reason, I can see the first album, was it Feel Good Lost, by the Broken Social Scene, where it's more mellow and it's more ambient, less lyrics. I don't think there's maybe 1 or 2 tracks that have lyrics on it. So you can see where that's kind of like where the seeds are planted there, and then they jump off onto this one. So they still have like a 60-40 split on lyrics on You Forgot It in People, but they still do have those instrumental tracks as well.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I always considered this kind of a side note, but just going to what you guys were saying, I always considered this album kind of, and subsequent like Folkloric Feel kind of falls under the same thing too, of like bedroom rock, where it's like a CD you can just kind of put on in your room, lay in your bed. You can turn it up. It's kind of chill, but they'll still have its moments of maybe more upbeat. But generally, it's more, you don't need to be listening to it on like huge speakers for it to sound amazing.
Yeah. Although, I mean, it is kind of like indie rock quality sometimes, but like the sound quality. But that's part of the vibe, right?
It actually sounds really good. Like when I was playing it on like my big subwoofer and stuff, it sounded like great. Like,
yeah. No, actually, it's interesting you call it bedroom rock, but my CD I think is probably still in that Sunfire somewhere, like in the records. It never left. I just like kept it in there all the time. Like I'm sure I had it on my computer too, but yeah, all I have left is this thing.
So I guess that's a good segue for us to get into the. Oh wait, sorry. I should ask before we go ahead. Are there any songs that we missed or anything that you guys wanted to talk about?
I want to mention Pitter Patter Goes My Heart. It's a great, and I know I feel like every album we say it's a great ending to it, but this one truly is. You have like, it kind of kicks back in with like
It brings
anthem,
back, yeah.
you have like the violins and everything. It just kind of ends very pretty.
Yeah.
It was almost like that song was made to end the album. It's like, okay, we need to end this album. We don't know how to end it. Because even with Capture the Flag, it kind of feels like the same thing, like this. Everything's waking up, and then this is like everything winding back down.
Yeah, it's really nicely constructed that way. And I'm Still Your Fag right before it. What a name for a song. What a concept for lyrics. It's like, okay, that's good. And Samba, come on. They busted. That's like a straight up Samba. I love hearing those brush drums. Yeah, this is like, this is a long distance from like nu metal brush Samba.
It has like the trumpet solo in the middle. Or is that a trumpet? Yeah.
I don't remember. Yeah, I'd have to listen closely. Horns, nonetheless.
Now, I wanted to ask you guys, do you find like around like the halfway point of this album, it kind of gets more melancholy, like in the subject matter and like the songs? Like I would say
No.
kind of after like late 90s the anthems of a 17-year-old girl. Do you find from like that midpoint on, it starts to kind of take a more of a turn and kind of like the emotional or thematically?
I always thought the midpoint was like looks just like the sun Pacific theme section, where I always felt like, oh, we're in like Latin vacation land. But I can see why you'd think that if you are skipping those tracks.
Yeah, that could be it.
But I know what you mean, because what you're trying to say, because in the first half of the album you have Casey Accidental, which is more of like it kicks you into the album. Then you have Stars and Suns, Almost Crimes, which are two of the more like the poppiest songs on the album.
Mhm.
Whereas on the second half, you really just have Cause Equals Time, and then after that, you're kind of in the home stretch where you're just settling into that bedroom rock, as I've been calling it, where you can just sink into your bed, put the song on your headphones or in your Bluetooth speaker, and just fall asleep to it, or just dream of a better tomorrow, or whatever you want to do. The music playing in your ears. But I know what you mean. It's I kind of get what you're trying to say. Yeah, it's kind of more of a melancholy feeling, because yeah, the first half you'd have those peppy moments, and like what Ryan was saying, those kind of the Caribbean part there where you kind of travel down to go on vacation.
Yeah.
You have that vibe. It's more of a upbeat vibe as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just in terms of like "Lover Spit's" a great ballad. That's a pretty popular song, and it changes kind of the tone a little bit. But then when you get into "I'm Still Your Fag," which is like a pretty depressing song lyrically and all that stuff, and then that's the second last song, and then it mellows out with that reprise of anthems for a 17-year-old girl with "Pitter Patter Goes My Heart." So I just wanted to throw that out there to see if you guys got that vibe. But yeah, it's good to know.
I didn't really break it up too much in my head like that, but something about anthems I wanted to mention that's really great is that second, like I would call it like the second build up in the song, right? The whole like what's leading the way there is basically a vocal effects solo. Like there's two vocals and one is like just dancing around, and you're just like kind of following it as everything else is building around you. I just like, that's amazing. Obviously the producer made that happen.
Yeah, the one thing I like about that song is like it seems very straightforward and simple. Like the lyrics are so repetitive, but then the more you listen to it and the more you listen to that track, you're like the lyrics almost kind of take on like different meanings. Like it's like, okay, is it like, are these anthems of a 17-year-old girl, or is it like later on when it's like a more mature woman like looking back on like as a 17-year-old girl thinking like, oh, this is just like stupid. Like back when I first heard this album, I'm like, oh, this girl sounds hot. Like, what do I know, right? But then as like, time goes on, you start to see like it's much more nuanced than that, even though there's probably like 5 different lyrics in that whole song.
Well, it gets repetitive at the end, yeah.
It's also written by like a 30-year-old man.
That's true too, yeah. So maybe that says more about
back on his 17-year-old girl teenager.
This is more about him than it does about anybody. But
it goes to show you that like they were just putting out ideas. Like they weren't kind of constricted by anything. Like normally when you think rock, especially at the time, it was very like a macho thing. And then you look at this album, and I know it's very collaborative. You have a lot of different types of people, but like songs like songs like you were saying, "I'm Still Your Fag" is a song name. You would never get that from the previous generation of rock musicians. Or writing a song called "Anthems for a 17-Year-Old Girl." It's just kind of.
Although it's sung
by a woman on the album, but it's, I don't know. It says written by all songs by Kevin Drew and Brendan Canning, so I assume one of them wrote that for a woman.
Yeah.
Assuming.
You know, it's really interesting that you mentioned that. Like thinking about it, "I'm Still Your Fag," maybe Kurt Cobain would have written a song called that. Out of all, like going back in time, like you said, oh, you wouldn't get that, but out of all those artists that we've covered so far, maybe he would just like, whatever, fuck it.
Yeah, he would do that just like as a fuck you to everyone sort of thing. Yeah.
And also he's supportive of the community. So
yeah. No, it's interesting to see like over time how it's like songs like that you probably wouldn't see them, or you wouldn't see them earlier in the 90s, but then as it like it's warming up in the early 2000s, you're starting to see this more as like a defense or just trying to empathize, humanize
Well,
that community. So it's only grown over time, which is good, I guess.
And then now you have like Tyler the Creator writing like a breakup album, like two men breaking up.
Yeah,
it's like
that's great.
Pop art. It's great to hear that stuff. And like back then, this was like shocking seeing a song called "I'm Still Your Fag." You're like, whoa.
Right after Lover's Spit, which is gross.
So yeah, I guess any final notes before we move on?
Just one thing about Almost Crimes. Like when I was in a band with Kyle way back in the day called Drawing Constellations, it was just me and him. We sang it at the SLC at like, I don't know, some sort of acoustic show. Kyle, if you're listening, do you have footage of this? I was Feist. It was amazing. I got to do the high vocal part. I hope that footage is somewhere. So post it on your YouTube channel. Link me.
Yeah, I think the one. So when you guys do it, like, did you guys do it like in the straight up like the version that they do? Because that song has like so much energy, and it's like it's hard not to like bop around when you're sitting down or just get up and dance to it.
Kyle, I think just sang, and I sang Feist parts and played guitar. That's all acoustic guitar. It's like an acoustic show or something. So it's the strangest option for strangest choice.
I was like, no drums or bass line. That's what drives that song.
I know.
Drums are still good in it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess this can move us on to the artwork. So I have, most people or most listeners might not have this version that we're all showing off, which is like the original issue. I couldn't find an exact number. It's probably like, I want to say maybe 100,000 copies. Once they reached that, then they had to reissue. So the version that you see on Spotify, which came out in 2003, is the popular version, or the version that's been kind of mass produced. So this earlier version is just the limited release because they didn't expect the album to blow up like it did.
I just want to say, I want to throw in, release this cover, but the vinyl.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's just like the old school disgruntled hipster in me, but I was saying this before the show that I hated the fact that they changed this. Not that I prefer this cover over the new one or this cover is amazing, but I hate the fact that one of my favorite albums has two covers, like two different covers that are, and the one I have, I don't know, maybe I feel special because I have this one, but I don't know. To me, this is the cover. This is the album. When I see that other one, I'm like, I don't know what this is.
I understand that.
Don't show me this. Like, I want this version.
Did you do you think they took the Pitchfork review to heart? Because in the Pitchfork review, it opens it up by more or less calling this pretentious as like about like the break all codes above the barcode. Like it's like they look kind of pretentious, but then the review's just like drooling over this album.
The funny thing is it looks pretentious, but if you heard Kevin, Drew, and Brendan Canning talk for 2 minutes, you just know that they're huge nerds. It's a complete opposite of pretension. And I'll mention another album that changed covers, but this was prior to release, but I still bought the European version, which had the original cover, was The Strokes. They did the same thing. For Is This It? Their original cover is amazing. When we cover that album, I'll pull it out. And it had a different song on it. And it's always like, when you show people this is what the cover was going to be, and then this is what it is now, it's like, why? Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. I know why. This is the easiest way to tell, pick out the fake fans. By the way, that's our thumbnail if you're wondering what we're talking about.
Yeah, the new cover, the brown one.
Oh yeah, and sorry, if you're listening, I guess you have to Google what the other the limited release looks like. It's just like a black and white photo. If you go to the Pitchfork review, it's on there. Yeah, it's like a black and white photo of 3 members of the band.
Yeah, it looks like Charlie Spear and Andrew Whiteman. Is that Kevin Drew in the back? And then when you open it up, it's Brendan Canning.
Yeah, this like the original cover looks like something I would make in Photoshop. Like it's like, all right, just black and white, crossfade some photos, we're done.
Well, because I honestly think that this was just like they recorded an album and then just sent it to they just started the label to release this. Like they just sent it to a printing press saying make us 1,000 or whatever to sell at shows.
And and I don't think it's really that like pretentious. It's literally just like live, like guys jamming. So that's like really what the album's about. It's just they're big nerds. There's no huge concept here. They're just.
Yeah, and maybe it's like messed with them so much because other albums are more just like kind of graphic design. There's no photography or like pictures of them on the covers of their albums or anything like that. So I don't know. Maybe that they took that to heart. That one review. I don't even know. They have their choices.
One cool thing I'll mention about the one time I saw them live, it was for the self-titled album when they were touring that. First of all, the show was amazing, but I've never made this complaint before, but the show was too long.
Were you standing?
They played for like 2.5. It felt like they played for like 2.5 hours. They played like every song. They got to the point, it was late. I'd been standing. They were the only band to play. There was no opener, so you just stood and waited and waited. But anyways, during the show, the artist who drew the cover redrew the cover. So as they're playing in the background, you see it like being drawn at the end. I believe it was at the end of the show.
Oh,
you were there.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. I mean, the cover really lends itself to that, so I love that visualization.
I think we actually ran into each other there. We didn't know that each other was going to be there.
Yeah, I was living in Toronto at the time, so it was easier to get to concerts there. Yeah, that was cool. I think they had like 14 members or something on stage at the show. It's just like a huge show. No wonder it takes so long because you can just, tag team.
And it always made me wonder because I've only ever seen them in Toronto. So I saw them in Guelph once, but I've only ever had that experience of seeing everyone. Like I've never heard anthems for a 17-year-old girl performed by Lisa Lobson. Every time I've seen it, it's pretty much always Emily Haynes. Sometimes it was what's her face from the Stars would sing it, but like it's always the core members. Leslie Feist usually comes out. They do that thing. So I don't even know what a show would be like in a different city. I guess the closest was when me and Gordon saw them open up for Arcade Fire, and it was just sort of like the core touring members. But that show, in my eyes, was a disaster all around. I don't even count that. But yeah, seeing them live somewhere else, I think we get to see something special in Toronto, which I think it's one of the reasons why I always try to make it out to their shows here, because it is like a reunion, and they've even done shows where I remember they did a arts and crafts thing. I think me and Gordon went to that with Vince, another friend, where they had all the other arts and crafts bands playing before, but it wasn't like necessarily a band. It would be like two members from the Stars or something, or two members from whatever, and they would play a song. It was kind of a different thing.
Oh,
I don't know if you remember that, Gordon, or not, but
yeah. Was that the field trip one, their anniversary tour?
No. It was at the Docks, and it was Broken Social Scene, and the opener was just like, it wasn't even listed as an opener. It was just like all these
arts
just different
members.
Yeah, just different arts and craft people playing songs.
Yeah, I think I was at that show because so I wanted to ask you guys, since we're on this topic now, how many times have you seen them live, and what's your favorite show and the reason why? I guess I can answer because mine's the quickest. I've only seen them twice. Once was when they opened for Arcade Fire, which is most recently at the ACC, and the other one was I looked it up. It was in December of 2010, and that was at the Docks, and that was the second of two shows. So like everybody was there. So that made me like a fan of their live show. So I'm totally on board to go see them again whenever they tour again, or if they ever make another album. That's kind of my live experience. How about you, Anise? You seem to seen them the most.
I think it's 12 is the number of the times I've seen them, and I also bought tickets. And I've also bought tickets to see them live 2 other times.
Hey, did you ever see them at the Ford plant? That like kind of underground place? No. I think I just missed that. That was like when they were really small. Like those artists would.
I never saw them tour this album though, because they were originally supposed to come on tour and they were going to come to Waterloo. So I was like, oh, I can see them in town. So I bought a ticket, and then they canceled it because they canceled that tour because they got big and were added to Lollapalooza, that Lollapalooza tour. So then we bought tickets to the Lollapalooza tour, but then that didn't sell enough tickets, so that got canceled.
Oh shit.
So then it was like, okay, now I bought tickets specifically to see them twice, pretty much, and both times fell through. So I didn't actually get to see them until that Hillside, whatever year that was.
I think that was 2005, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And that show was probably my two favorite is the Hillside show, and then the field trip, just because it was really cool.
You guys had some like cool like perks with that, right? Like you could leave and come back, and they gave you an album and stuff. Like I totally missed out by not going to that.
Yep.
How about you, Ryan?
I'm trying to remember. Like I can't remember totally, but I seem to remember seeing them outside. They weren't at V Fest, were they? They very well could have been.
No, they were in the second year, the year after. So I think it was 2008, the year after we went. That's when Massive Attack had troubles with their visa, so they were a last minute fill in.
Oh, that's why I'm thinking about that. Yeah, right. So I probably just 2 or 3 times, like that one on the self-titled album. I don't even know what venue was that at with the painting in the background.
I was at the Cool House.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That was a really good show too, but what killed it was it took them forever to get on stage because there was no opener, and there was like rumors that Feist was going to come out and open, and there was like rumors that they were going to play like a joint show where they played both their songs. Because I believe
Feist was at V Fest. That's what I was thinking that.
Yeah, anyway, but there was, I believe, at the Docks, the Broken Social Scene played some Feist songs with Feist. I remember them playing "Feel It All" and something else.
Nice.
At shows, or I don't know, they're mixing in my head right now. But yeah, probably those are my favorite two. Was the field trip and the first time at Hillside, because it was just like a magical. That whole weekend was magical.
Yeah.
So I guess we can move on to where do you rank this album in the band's discography, or what's your ranking look like? Who wants to go first, or do you want me to go?
Number 1. This is their masterpiece. This is like it's all downhill from here. No, there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff, and there's a lot of I would say there's a lot of peaks, but there are some valleys. But this thing is just solid, like straight through. And it doesn't. They didn't replicate the sound after. It seems, I don't know. It was just a special thing, a special moment with the special collection of people, the special producer, and then So this is number 1.
Yeah. How about I guess I can kick it off. I agree. This is number 1. And then if I had to rank the other 5, I'd probably go. They're self-titled, which came out in 2005. I think that's the double disc. And then I think Forgiveness Rock Record includes a bonus disc. I don't know why I think that's a bonus or a 2-disc album as well. But
the self-titled came with EB to Be Me or whatever it's called, where there was like 5 other tracks. There was 5 or 6 other tracks. It was like an EP that came
that's probably what it is then. And then so those 2 are interchangeable because I really like those, so I can throw either one of those on. But I went the self-titled and then Forgiveness Rock Record, and then I put Hug of Thunder. It's probably the one I've listened to the least out of those 4 albums. And then Feel Good Loss is probably the one I listen to the absolute least. Like I don't listen to it very often. I've heard it a bunch of times, but it's not my go-to. So that's kind of how I rank it. Kind of, it's weird. It's like order of release since this album. How about you, Denise?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I went. I kind of went a little different. I went. You Forgot It in People, and then when it came, because it was hard because Broken Social Scene, that self-titled album, a lot of my connections to those songs are live, live recordings. So taking that out of it, I'd probably go. You Forgot It in People, Forgiveness Rock Record, then Broken Social Scene. Then probably Hug of Thunder, Feel Good Loss. Some would go nice. Listen to Feel Good Loss more back in my college days than I do now, because it was kind of like I wanted more Broken Social Scene, and there was a 3-year break between albums, so there was time to pick up that one album that you missed.
Yeah.
And Hug of Thunder, I think it'll grow on me. I listened to it a lot last year when it came out, or sorry, in 2017 when it came out. The fucking pandemic has felt like forever.
Pretty much.
I lost track
of time.
But when Hug of Thunder came out in 2017, I listened to it a lot more, I think in 2018 even. But listening back to it, I like the second half of the album better than the first. I feel like they kind of settled in more into like a sound. But yeah, they in all these albums, they kind of, as much as I love their older releases, they do lose the magic of this album. Because when this album came out, it's almost like they didn't know what they were doing yet. Whereas not when they went to the next one, there was a bit of a blueprint and they were trying to recreate what they did. And they kind of did, but it was a lot noisier and a lot more, like, it's a good album too. But yeah, and then after that, they kind of just found their sound now with Forgiveness Rock Record and Hug of Thunder. And then they also had the 2 Broken Social Scene Presents albums that are also really good.
Yeah, the
I
Kevin
really
Drew
like
one.
that Brandon Canning album was really good. That was when we saw them at the Docks. That's what they were touring. Were those? That's why it was like that whole
Yeah. Oh,
the
yeah.
Broken Social Scene presents. That's why it was like all the different artists from Broken Social Scene performing, because there was supposed to be a series of a whole bunch, but they never sort of followed it through. They just sort of stopped
Just
with the.
those two. Wasn't it just those two albums, Brendan Cannon and Kevin Drew? Yeah.
But it's interesting to hear them because when you hear the Kevin Drew one and the Brendan Canning one, you kind of see what each one brings to the band.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
And another what I found interesting too was I preferred the Brendan Canning one, but if you would have asked me prior to release, I would have probably guessed I would have preferred the Kevin Drew one. I don't know why.
Yeah,
but
I do actually. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Have you ever heard those, Gordon?
I've heard the I want to say I've heard the Kevin Drew one. Is that who sings "Backed Out on the Street" or on the corner?
That's Kevin Drew. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like that one. I've heard that one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good song. That's the first thing that comes to mind. So I don't know. I've probably heard the Brandon Canning one. I just can't think of it right now off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Ryan, you hinted at something. You guys, I guess both of you have. How do you think their sounds change? Just a random question. How do you think their sounds change from this one? Like when I hear it, I see it. It hasn't gotten worse. It's just gotten fuller as more people have come on board. I would say with Hug of Thunder, that one's almost got a little more polished. Like it's not lo-fi. It doesn't feel like it has that lo-fi sensibility that these other ones do. And I do know that like David Neufeld, he produced this album and then he produced the one after it, but that's all he's done as far as I know. So how do you feel that the sounds kind of changed or evolved over since the release of this one?
This seems to have a lot of, okay, it's a weird way to put it. Simply put, a lot of random elements coming and going. Because like maybe like what you said, and they didn't really have figured out what they were doing yet, so they were just like trying out a bunch of different stuff because there was whatever, sky's the limit, and it seems to be like, at least maybe this is my impression from the self-titled album, like it was more about layering guitars and stuff. Like it was a bit more noisier, it was a bit more live sound, but at the same time they still have the horns, so they're trying to recreate it a bit. But this, like, there's drum machines, there's some, like, even though there's a lot of layers on this album, there are moments where there's just a few layers, but they're unique, they're like unusual. It's not like just guitar and drums. It would be some like violin and a banjo or whatever.
Right.
And the distortion on, like the overdrive distortion on the guitars on "You Forgotten in People" is a lot softer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like on when you get on the self-titled, it's a lot more harsher, more high end to the distortion, it seems. And also on that album, it seemed like a lot of these songs, because a lot of the songs on these are huge staples. They all are, but they're huge staples and big parts of their live show. So like when you see like EB Dreams of Payment live, 7/4 Shoreline live, Fire Boy live, Major Label Debut, It's All Gonna Break, those are big moments in their live show. And it's almost like they were designed as such, and that's probably why they're more guitar-y. But this album, like as much as this one is more of the bedroom rock, that one's more of like played at a concert hall.
It was like they had just blown up. Almost, like It's All Gonna Break. That is an amazing live moment. I remember that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I like the first thing I did was I wanted to confirm. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and then the two releases since then, like Forgiveness Rock record was very delicate album, a lot of like almost dreamy stuff on it, and then Hug of Thunder, yeah, it seems like they were kind of playing with some stuff in the first half of the album until it settles into the more polished rock songs. But I think that's more accustomed to them being older and just their artistic output is this band now. So
yeah. The first thing I did this week was I looked up the set list from the show that I wanted to confirm the date that we went to that show. So it was December 10th, 2010. And if you look at that set list, it's 24 songs, and it seems like it's just like a greatest hits of like those three albums, which makes that like whole show even more amazing. That like it's like every song every song you can almost like just scrolling through the set list, you can see like where the big moments picked up, and they have a really good live show. I more than anything, if you can see them live, I would recommend it.
Oh yeah, it's a party on stage.
Yeah.
I still remember at that show that Gordon's speaking about specifically. So they finished their show, and then they're coming out for, if you know, most bands leave the stage and then pretend that they're not going to come out for an encore. Whereas usually for Broken Social Scene, Kevin Drew doesn't leave. He keeps talking and starts asking the members to come back on stage because hometown show.
I remember, yeah.
I remember Brandon Cannon coming out with a joint in his mouth, and he's like clearly like fucked up at this point because he's been like chugging alcohol. I remember he was like dressed like a rocker for the first half and all this stuff, and I'm like, that guy is just having a ball. And if you know Kevin, and if you know Brandon Canning's like history, this is like his peak. Like he's been in bands in Canada all throughout, I believe, the late 80s and 90s. He was in By Divine Right at one point with like Leslie Feist. That's where that connection happens. No way. To see him as part of a band that has this much respect, and he's like one of the conductors of this band, it's cool to see. Like just knowing his story and like how long he's been like a part of the Toronto music scene.
Yeah, man, get drunk, smoke a joint, you made it.
I know.
Yeah, no, it's funny. You just kind of triggered a memory that I had from that show. We weren't too far from there. It wasn't a big venue, but we weren't too far up from the stage. But there's a guy in front of us, and he was smoking a joint. And this bouncer came up to him and like tapped him and was like ready to like take him out or get rid of the joint. And the guy, without even realizing it, turns and exhales right in the bouncer's face. And then so everybody's like, whoa! And then we're just like stunned. And he was like terrified at that moment because he realized what he did. And then so he threw the joint away. But then everybody kind of rallied and like they're like, keep him, let him stay. And he didn't have the joint anymore. So he ended up being able to stay. But that was like a hilarious moment that happened at that show. So I don't even know if this band's so indie. It's is this the band's peak? Where, if they do have a peak, what would it be?
I think your discography kind of sums it up. You're right. They peaked here. I mean, artistic peak probably here. I think like they're.
What about in terms of like clout?
Yeah, but this is where I was gonna say their cultural influence. Maybe the next album, but I don't know because this started arts and crafts. So
I would say that this is their peak purely because if they never did anything after this album, they would still be remembered exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they were like, no matter what they like, given that everything they've released since has been good and like critics have liked it, fans have enjoyed it. So everything has generally been good that they've released. But even without any of that, and they never released anything again, this album, like You Forgot It in People, would still be held in like high regard. It would still be mentioned whenever you're talking about indie rock, especially if like that era. Like it's a well-respected album, and I think nothing would have changed that. Like it won the Polaris Prize in Canada for Canadian Album of the Year. Like it's cemented in history.
Yeah. I think it won the Juno as well.
No.
For alternative.
It captures a moment in time that was really special. So in terms of all those artists about to, all the ones involved about to blow up.
Yeah, because like there is that big break between albums, between this album and You Forgot It in People, and Self-Titled. But the thing is, during that time, you got Feist, you got The Stars, you got Metric, you got Do Make Say Think, you got every band, like every member's other band. So like maybe Broken Social Scene had to take a back seat to that, but those other bands were killing it. Like Feist became huge. One was like, I remember it's still surreal, like seeing her at the Grammys with Kevin Drew. It was like, seemed surreal. Like it was like a weird thing. And he's just dressed like, how he dresses.
So like a plaid button up.
I'm pretty sure I saw at one of the shows the bass player from Stars playing trombone in Broken Social Scene.
Yeah, Evan Cranley. He's in the band. He's like plays trombone.
I know him as Stars bass player.
Like, there's a song on the opening on the first album, one of my favorite songs from Feel Good Loss, and it's one that I've heard them play. It's called Cranley's Gonna Make It. It's the last track on the album.
Nice. Okay.
That guy, man, every time I've seen the Stars live and even Broken Social, that guy gives it. That guy, I've seen him finish like a whole bottle of Jack Daniels in like an hour-long show. Like it's crazy. Yeah.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, he's still alive.
Okay.
I remember seeing a picture of him like, oh, he looks pretty good.
Nice.
This is the thing with having a big band, especially with fun music like this. But even when it's anytime I've been in a band where there's a bunch of members, like just imagine the green room. Like it's just a party. Everybody's hanging out and it's like it's not like, you and four other guys or you and three other guys. It's like 14 people. That's a
Yeah.
that's a
I,
serious
I
party.
think I think the benefit with like having so many members, it can be a challenge, but at the same time, it works because it's such a large, almost collective. It's a group of people, and they seem pretty loose with it. It's like, hey, can you sing a part on this album or play a part? If not, cool. Okay, we got like somebody else that can do it.
It very much seems though, like I know we're talking big, it's a big band, but it's like really it's like a big touring band. Because especially like these first three albums, yes, it's a collaborative and they all work together. But the first three were like credited as Kevin Drew, Brandon Canning. So it seems like a lot of it was their vision. Whereas going forward with those last two albums, it seemed like that's when they became more of a band, where like Andrew Whiteman and all these guys were actually like, I guess, a bigger part of the songwriting process, I guess.
So when they toured, like outside of Toronto or maybe Canada, were they able to put together such a huge band? Because that's the disadvantage of having such a huge band. You got to bring 40 people on the road.
The songs just become different. So like,
so they do downsize a little.
Yeah, like you can search and find like full shows where they're playing in New York and stuff on YouTube. And yeah, it doesn't sound bad or anything. It's just different. We're just kind of spoiled here. Like when they sing a song, it's like, because it's weird, because even on like their biggest song that we saw on Spotify, Sweetest Kill, is some like Lisa Lopsinger sings that one. Oh no, she sings the other one. Never mind. But like Lisa Lopsinger, she like sang a song on an album, but now she's not even in the band because she's doing her own thing. So it's like, okay, now they have someone else singing her song.
Yeah.
But she was there originally to sing the songs of Leslie Flight and Emily Baines and Amy Milan, and then she sang a song, and now they have someone. It's just like it's kind of a cool collaborative thing, constantly changing, almost like what we see with Queens of the Stone Age and Nine Inch Nails that we talked about. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this is more, I don't know, more Canadian and more indie.
Yeah, more solid Canadian content.
No.
So I guess before we ask the question, where do you guys throw this album into place in history? Like, to me, I see it as like they're huge in the indie rock scene. I don't know if they're much bigger than that, but at the same time, I do see this album, or think of this album as kind of like a time capsule in terms of the influence that Pitchfork had or was starting to get. Like, I think of like where this album comes out, I start to think of like Arcade Fire. I start to think of like, you start moving into like Modest Mouse and like all those like mid 2000s bands. How do you guys feel about it? Like their place in history.
Like I said earlier, it seemed like it was like a phase shift. When this showed up, it was like, oh, suddenly now there's this indie rock thing. This is what really put it on the scene for me, and I started writing music differently, and like so many artists spawned from this album. So it's got a really strong place in Canadian history. So
I was actually gonna. Like to add to that, I would say in the 90s, there was a lot of, I'll say straight up, there was a lot of good Canadian rock music. And a lot of it was like bands like Sloan, Our Lady Peace, I Mother Earth, Tea Party. Like there's a whole bunch of Canadian bands that didn't really cross over. Our Lady Peace did with their Clumsy album, but a lot of those bands didn't really cross over. But now you had the internet and things like Pitchfork. All of a sudden we started seeing these Canadian bands getting attention. Because you had your, like we said, Arcade Fire, which we talked about in the past. You had Wolf Parade. You had the Constantine, but the biggest out of them all at the time when it came out was Broken Social Scene, and it was the first one out of that batch. So it brought this like new attention to Canada and Toronto, and you had the New Pornographers. They were doing sort of the same thing, but on the West Coast. So there was this like new attention. I think it was partially driven by the internet, whereas now you had like a Pitchfork or any magazine is reviewing whatever comes out because anything is available all around the world instantly. So it was a boom for Canadian rock. Like I think back of like that era of buying albums like of Canadian bands, these indie albums that, were getting released in the States maybe a month later, but they were getting reviewed on Pitchfork, like Death from Above, Metric, The Stars, like all the Broken Social Scene bands, plus all the other Canadian bands. And then some that even fall under the arts and crafts, like the Stills and the Deers, and all these bands were coming out and were getting attention. Was it because their music was good? Was it because their music was good and it was on arts and crafts? Was it because their music was good and they were associated with Toronto and there's new attention? It just seemed like there was a lot going on. Whether it was music coming from Toronto, Montreal, or BC, it seemed like there was definitely a lot of great indie rock or just rock music going on in Canada, and they just brought attention to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was probably like a perfect storm. It just seemed to all be happening at once, and like I maybe I'm a little skewed, but it just seems like it started right when I started paying attention. That's when it really started taking off. Now, yeah, it goes back to what you were just saying, Anise. Why did you or whoever start paying attention to it first to influence other people? Was it because it's like legit good, or was it because there was a really good review on a website? Who knows? But it seemed like the perfect storm of like everything was the right place, the right time. This was the moment for this kind of music to move up.
Yeah, Gordon, you said like before really listening to this, you were into probably more harder stuff, right? Heavier stuff, or you would gravitate towards that. And this is like definitely mellower out. So does this like, in your mind, is this a phase shift for like your listening experience in terms of listening to more mellow music?
Yeah, I would say yes and no. Mostly yes, simply because I was a big fan of like everything that was in the 90s, kind of what we discussed in the past few weeks on episodes and all that post-grunge stuff like that. I didn't have to take a step to listen to harder music when new metal was coming out, because it was everywhere, right? So that's when I started getting into like the harder, more metal or heavier rock kind of stuff. And then it was kind of around this time. This is kind of when like Bjork, Radiohead, all that stuff was starting to take a hold of me. So it just seemed like the natural progression, and I started moving away from maybe the heavier rock stuff. So that's kind of how my natural progression went into, I guess this is even softer or lighter than like 90s rock for the most part, right? But yeah. It's a new vein, but it still kind of seems related to like the 90s stuff.
I'll add to that too, because for me too, like generally before this, I listened to a lot heavier stuff. Even on heavy albums, I would pick out the heaviest songs on those albums as my favorite, you know, like I was always drawn. I thought that I didn't like more chill music, like I loved Radiohead, and I was still listening to that stuff as well. Mm-hmm. But with this album, it seemed like it still had everything I liked about the heavy music. It still had like the build-ups, it still had the distorted guitars, it still had like the interesting, you know, guitar riffs and leads and solos. It still had all the pieces were there. It was just presented to me in a different way.
Yeah.
And like with more like pop sensibilities. And it was at the right time where I was ready for I was no longer just a, you know, metal kid with
it's almost like a reaction against that anti-pop vibe of 90s rock. Like just pop music sucks, where it was very much split. It seemed like back then, like there's a rock world and there's a pop world, and they don't different radio stations, whereas these guys are just like, whatever, this is we can have a samba, that's fine.
Because I had a friend today, and he was like, we were with my friend today, and he was telling me, he's like, yeah, music today, it's like everything in one. It's a rock song, rap song, country song, all in one. And I'm like, yeah, that can be a good thing. And then he looked at me, he's like, it can also be a bad thing.
I guess I think you have a perfect song for that to all work, that combo.
I guess it depends on how it's constructed and how it's presented as well. Because I find a lot of times now, like when you hear it in like a lot of the indie rock or some of the music going on today, the mixing of the genre sounds very natural, but sometimes it does feel forced.
Yeah.
But you're gonna get that. It's gonna happen.
So do you think if we keep mixing genres for enough years, maybe like 100 years, since we're all like on the internet, we'll just have one genre? It'll just all even out, just like the gene pool.
I think all the genres should just stick to their own genres. It shouldn't talk to anyone.
Go back to your genre. Go back to the genre you came from.
Genre supremacy?
No, I actually think the whole idea of genre, like I understand it's to categorize, but it's like, just give me good music.
Yeah, I always hated answering that question in interviews, and a wise man told me, you have to answer it because it's good for marketing. So just answer the damn question. It's like, all right.
Because like when you look up a lot of bands, you're like, oh, what kind of music is this? And especially a lot of the bands like of this era, they have like 10 different genres listed because because now you have like a genre, and then a subgenre breaks off, and then someone is influenced by that, so it becomes a subgenre of that, and now it's like a sub. Okay, it's just rock. Like it has guitars in it and drums.
No, you have to have a unique hashtag. That's how you need a unique hashtag genre, so you can,
You need to hack the genre, hack the system. Okay, so I guess any final thoughts before we ask the question? Anything that we might have missed on? Okay, so is this album essential? Who wants to go first?
Yes, it's a masterpiece.
All right, I like the energy.
Done.
Is that all you got?
Well, I mean, we've already talked about why, but yeah, it's a masterpiece. It's just, and it's way underrated. It's just, maybe it's just in my mind, but I have a feeling a lot of Canadians actually, at least around Toronto, share their opinion of, where they see Broken Social Scene amongst the other indie bands. Where have you?
Right.
I'm leaning towards what like Ryan said, because it's also. It might be like when you look at indie rock as a whole, like the other music that was coming out around the time, it might be sort of like a blip in the radar of it all. But when you take into account like what it did for like what we were saying with the Canadian music, it seems like it's bigger than that, and just the attention it gets and the way it's still talked about today and it's still brought up. And it's I feel it's essential. I feel like everyone should listen to it, even if you're going to listen to it just once.
Yeah.
Just throw it on. I'm sure if you throw it on, you're gonna want to finish it, and you're gonna find something you like in it. And it's just such a relaxed listen. You can throw it on while washing the dishes, while laying in bed, while reading the book. And like I was saying earlier, songs don't even have lyrics, and I don't even notice. They're just so good and busy that your mind isn't expecting it or needing it.
Well, even like songs like Pacific Theme, there's the guitar is taking the lead. So they're not just like leaving you out to dry. They're making sure you're guided along this journey, even if it's not with vocals.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Is it?
I'm going to surprise you with. No, I'm not going to surprise you with. Yeah. Hell yeah, it's essential. It's to me, it's the. I'll come at it from a nostalgia angle because you guys have really touched on what the album means in the bigger picture. So for me, I see this as an album that's like the soundtrack of like the 2000s for me, or the soundtrack of especially my college years. So this album, and then going to college, and then finishing college, I see that more as Broken Social Scene, like the self-titled album, because that came out in 2005, which is right in the middle of when in my college years. So those two albums are kind of just pivotal to what I was listening to during those years. So I've never gotten tired of them. I've always, the more I listen to them, I find the more I notice something new, or the more I like it, or it's like, oh, I finally remember the name of the song. It's not just like track 9 anymore. So I enjoy it for those reasons. So it's easily an essential album. It's a masterpiece.
Does it bring you back to the trunk every time you put it on? Just curious.
The trunk?
Does it bring you back to the trunk or what song was it?
That would have been, I just remember having really cold hands that night because I didn't have my gloves and I was holding the tripod, and I was like, my hands are so cold. That reminds me more of the trunk than anything. But this album, I don't know how it's kind of evolved from like not when I first heard it anymore. It's more of just the overall experience. It's grown into something else for me.
Yeah.
I was going to say a regret I have involving Broken Social Scene. So like I was saying, I saw them live a shit ton of times, like a stupid amount of times. But there was a stretch where I saw them maybe like 3 or 4 times, like a 2-year span. So they're going to play a show at the Harborfront. And I was like, I've literally seen them live like a ton of times. I'll skip it. And then they filmed that performance and put it in a movie. They literally wrote a movie around that performance. The movie, have you ever seen this movie, It's Broken?
I've seen it. Yeah, it's like the weird, like kind of love story concert, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good movie. I have it on Blu-ray. Good movie.
I just remember, I think we might have been just hanging out like at your parents' place a lot that summer, but I just remember seeing it on TV all the time. Like it was just a good thing to throw on at a party or to chill, and it just plays in the background, and it's a good soundtrack too, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess that wraps up this week's episode of the Essential Albums podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you were listening to us or watching us on the live stream, we appreciate that. And if you listen to us through audio only, you can catch our episodes on Anchor and Spotify. What album are we doing next week? I don't
know. What are we doing?
Well, we don't know. We're building a mystery, so we'll surprise.
I can look it up. Just keep talking for 2 seconds, and I'll look it up real quick.
I don't know.
I'm sure it's something really good.
Yeah, I
think
it's
don't
really
want to
good.
miss it, whatever it is.
I
know we got
all
some good ones coming
forgetting.
Hey, make sure you ring the bell and subscribe so you don't miss it when it
don't
comes
forget
up.
to like and subscribe. Always comment. We enjoy the feedback. I guess before we announce what we're doing next week, original music by Ryan Dugal, artwork by Vincent Tran. I don't want to spoil it because I know we got some doozies.
I'm excited now.
What's that?
Next week we will be talking about My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
Ooh.
Sick. It's gonna be good. All right.
Oh,
you got it
updating
right
the background art. There we go. All right, yeah. All right, I'm excited for next week then. All right.
Well, see y'all then.
Peace. Next week.
Yeah.